Welcome to Stripes and Stories, a show about life as a Pryor Tiger. I'm your host, Tina James. Today we'll be turning our attention to the classroom with Kristen Graves, the Director of Teaching and Learning.
I'm Kristen Graves, and you're listening to Teacher Talk, conversations that take us inside the thinking behind a teacher's most powerful moves. Today, we're chatting with our Superintendent, Dr. Lisa Muller. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm glad to be able to do this.
So you've gotten to serve many different roles as an educator. Do you still think of yourself as a teacher?
I do, yes. I definitely still think of myself as a teacher, both from my experience as a high school teacher and also because I continue to teach classes at the university level. So I have the opportunity a couple of times a year to teach doctoral students who are seeking their degree in education administration. And that keeps my hand a little bit fresh, I think, even though it might be a bit different from the K-12 world. It's fun to try out new strategies in the classroom.
When you go in classrooms now, because that's one of the benefits of being in working at the district level, is you get to see a lot of different grade levels, a lot of different things happening in classrooms. What goes through your mind when you go into a teacher's classroom? What are you thinking about?
Sure. Well, first of all, when I go into a classroom, I'm really looking to have that sense of learning that's going on, that students are really engaged, that they are excited to be here at school. And I love spending time in classrooms because being able to interact with kids is the best part of our jobs, as I mentioned before. So I'm really looking to see that student engagement, that they're involved in their learning, and that the teacher is hopefully enjoying their time in the classroom as well.
When you say you look for student engagement, what is it that you see that tells you, hey, students here are really engaged?
Yeah. So, and of course, it's hard because we all know that there's no real proof that a student is engaged. That's an internal thing, and we can't guarantee one way or the other. But certainly, there are signs of that. So you have. I'm not looking for a quiet classroom. Mm-hmm. I think often the quieter classrooms you may not necessarily have as much engagement. So I want to hear that hum, the kind of buzz of learning that's happening because students are working in pairs or small groups, or they're doing centers, or whatever it is that they are actively involved in their tasks, and hopefully that is an indication of engagement as well.
Do you feel like there are, of course, again, we just said our profession is so complex. There are so many things you could choose to focus on as a teacher. What do you think the biggest difference-making things are in learning? What are the moves that teachers make that are so powerful, they're worth prioritizing to the top?
I really think that building in formative assessment checkpoints is one of the most important pieces, because so often we design that lesson that we think is going to be awesome. And it may be something that as you're going along, things seem to be clicking pretty well. But sometimes students have gotten really good at school, right? And they know how to send those signals and appear that everything is going well. So building in quick and fast, easy checkpoints for determining if they are getting the learning pieces that you're wanting them to achieve, and taking time to build that in, I think, is a really important piece. And I'm talking about simple things like, using small whiteboards to have them write an answer and hold it up, or doing some of the hand signals, and just seeing who is following along. Are we having some misconceptions that I can quickly fix during this lesson, rather than having to go back and fix it later when I realize from a more formal assessment that they didn't quite get that point. So I think that is a key piece of effective instruction.
In your mind, does that happen every day? Like you're constantly assessing that?
I would say yes in the quick checks. So this is not something I think we need to really have a major, now we're stopping and assessing, but even things like exit tickets or entrance tickets. If you finishing up something during a class and you want kids to think about something that, when they come back in, and I'm thinking from a secondary model because that is the background that I have personally, but the next day having them bring an entry ticket and being able to check very quickly, did they get that concept that you were working on the day before? Because then you can quickly monitor and adjust that teaching if you need to, if it's showing that, oh, no, we did miss something here. Let me recoup and maybe do a quick reteach.
Yeah, that makes the shift from what did I teach my students to what are my students learning?
Right.
Where are we and what do I want to do next? And there have been many classrooms in the district here where I've seen teachers weaving all those things together. The activities they're doing with students provide that space for them to interact. They get explicit coaching on how to have that interaction. The interaction itself provides the kind of formative assessment you're talking about because stuff is happening out loud.
Right.
So teachers can hear what students are taking away from the learning. So we have a lot of teachers who do that really well.
I agree. It's exciting to see that.
How do you feel like your experience as a teacher shape what you do in your current role?
So I always try to think about decisions on how that affects both our students and our staff in the classroom, because that is important. We always talk about our focus on students and how we want to put students first. And I believe that's the right philosophy. But if we're putting students first, we also have to think about what that means for our staff members who directly interact with them.
Mm-hmm. If you went back to your time in teaching high school, would your teaching look different today than it looked then?
Yes. So I did spend most of my career focused on the teaching and learning side of administration, even after I left the classroom. So I started as an instructional coach as my first role outside the classroom before I went into administration. And when I did go into administration, I was the academic principal at a large high school. So I really focused a lot on the teaching and learning pieces in my work early on, and then continued to have that as my primary focus when I moved into central office roles. So I've spent a lot of years thinking about teaching and learning more and more, because as you have the opportunity to go through different professional development, to continue to keep up with the most recent research about best practices and how we can be effective in the classroom, you realize that while some of the practices I think I would continue doing some of the things I did during the 9 years that I taught in the classroom, I know there are lots of other things that I would want to add in if I were to return now.
That's definitely the thing about our profession. Like, one, it's constantly evolving, but also it was complex to begin with. There are so many things to think about. So if you're thinking about what would be different, what would be different?
Well, I have to admit, of course, that the technology picture looks a lot different than when I was actively teaching in the high school classroom. We did have technology. I wrote a few technology grants in my career as a teacher to add those opportunities for students, but the level of technology access and the breadth of resources that students and teachers have now is vastly different. So thinking about how to effectively incorporate that technology without being too reliant on it or without it becoming stale, because I do think even with all of the things that technology brings, that it's still so important to have that interaction between teachers and student to students to have effective learning. So it's something that I know I would need to address, but it would be also seeking that balance of the most effective ways to integrate it into teaching. And then just some of the deeper questioning strategies that we've learned about. And I used a lot of group techniques and student interactive techniques when I was in the classroom, but they're new ones. So some of those are actually ones that I do use when I teach at the college level as well.
What things would be the same? These things are so core to your teaching. you'd still see them in your classroom?
Well, I think the true core of any classroom is building relationships with students. That was something I really focused on in the classroom, and it's one of the most rewarding parts of teaching. So I think that's not just individual teacher to student, but I think that's helping students build relationships with one another as well. Because if you're going to challenge students to really share their thinking, to work collaboratively, if they don't have a base of trust between themselves, then that can also hinder the being able to really feel confident about sharing things, because it's hard, especially when you're thinking about students who are teenagers. They're often very worried about what their peers think of them, and especially if they're worried, oh, I don't want to say this because I might be wrong, and then others will make fun of me or laugh at me or whatever. And even though all the students are thinking about that same thing about themselves, it's hard to realize that others may be just as concerned about that as you are. So building that collaborative classroom climate and helping it be okay to be wrong inside the classroom, that is something I don't think should ever change about teaching. And that's one of the reasons that I have those mixed feelings about technology. I think it can be a great tool, but can also perhaps interfere at times with that.
You spoke to like the balance with technology and how it can be a great tool. It can also get in the way of some of that interconnectedness. Do you think it's harder for today's kids to build personal connections?
I do. I think they spend so much time in the online world that sometimes it's easy to forget that they have people right there and perhaps ready to interact with them, or perhaps also really involved in their online world. And that's certainly something that has changed in the time that I left the classroom. So it was technology was not nearly as ubiquitous as it is today outside of the school. Whether we're using it inside the classroom or not, kids had those distractions that were not there a number of years ago. So it is something that I know is a struggle for our current classrooms.
Do you think kids come to the classroom already with those skills? It's really just making them happen? Or do you feel like you have to teach explicitly kids how to interact with each other?
I think there's some of both. I think certainly we have a range of kids coming to us with different skills in that area, just like they come to us with different skills in the academic content. So we certainly, it would not be a bad idea to spend some time explicitly teaching the skills of how do you interact well, particularly when I think about the social studies classroom where I spent the majority of my time teaching, how to have productive discourse, especially if people might disagree with you. That's something that we can see that all of our students would benefit from having those skills. I think a lot of our adults would benefit from honing those skills these days. So definitely taking time to teach the interpersonal skills is important. And that's also where I see a real direct connection with our Leader in Me program and the curriculum that we teach explicitly, as well as the encouragement as they move into the upper grades of living out those things that they've learned earlier through the program.
And just like the academic skills that go with them beyond school, those skills will also go with them well beyond their schooling, no matter what path they ultimately take.
Right. And that's what we hear when we talk to employers. What they say is, we want to have people who come out of your system being able to, be on time, show up every day and work hard. And they want people who are able to interact well with others on the job, collaborate, and be able to work in groups. And so those are important skills, and we have the ability to teach those in addition to the academic content by doing the kinds of activities in the classroom that require those skills.
So in all the things that you get to do, last question, what is your favorite part of your role?
So this is a great role. I think that it is challenging, but it's also very rewarding. And so I would say my favorite parts, and sometimes it's easy to get away from this, but being able to see all of the different things that are happening in our classrooms, all the way from pre-kindergarten through senior year, and the exciting things that our students are doing and achieving, and what's happening with our teachers teaching in the classroom. Those times that I really get to interact with kids and staff members are my favorite parts.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, that's a wrap for today's episode of Stripes and Stories. Be sure to join us next time when we'll sit down with Laura Holloway, the director of the Tiger Pride After School program.